Hi guys, it's Alex again from Ascend Performer to Leader. In this video I'm going to cover commercial awareness for consultants. This is a request that came from one of my followers on LinkedIn, so shout out to Elsu, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You asked for a video on commercial awareness, so I thought I would cover a 3-step framework starting with contracts. We'll then go on to the commissioning of work and how that's done and managed. And then finally, we'll cover project management generally in terms of program, earned value analysis, and the billing to the client. So let's dive into the framework. Hopefully this is nice and clear. We'll start on the left with the contracts and what they typically cover. We'll move on to commissioning of work, and then we'll flow down finally into the project management of the work. So we'll begin with the contracts. Typically, in consulting, the contract is between two parties, the client and the provider of services, aka the consultant, i.e. us. The contract will typically cover these things. So there will be the agreed rates. Typically, there'll be charge out rates per individual member of staff, going right through from junior members of the team up to the director or partner, depending on the business type. There'll be the fees that the consultant may charge on top of the base cost built up from rates and hours, and we'll come on to payment mechanism in a minute. There'll be something on how risk is managed, typically between the two parties, the client and the provider, and how risk is notified to the client, etc. There'll be how change, or in the engineering discipline, sometimes called compensation events or variations, how that is managed between the two parties. Finally, there'll be something on arbitration or disputes and how they're managed, and the named arbitrator will be mentioned within the contract document, so who that party would be if it comes to that. Normally disputes are resolved amicably before arbitration is progressed. And then finally, on the right hand side here, you can see there's a number of insurances that may be stated, again dependent upon the extent of the services. Typically for more design or knowledge based services, we have something called professional indemnity, which makes sure that if there's a claim under the reasonable skill or care clause, then that would state a value of the limit of professional indemnity, and that's the amount that could be claimed if it's found that the services provided were wrong or incorrect. Then there'll be an employer's liability insurance, which covers the individuals working for that company, and if anything was to happen to them in the duties that they are performing. And then finally, there's public liability insurance. This is typically a factor in my discipline in construction and engineering, where you may potentially harm or hurt the public in the duties that you perform. So if it's more site-based physical works that you're performing, then that insurance would apply. But typically for professional services, it'll be the professional indemnity here on the left that'll be a key factor. Out of rates and fees, when we provide in a proposal for a project in terms of the cost, there'll be a payment mechanism that will be stated in the contract. Typically, for consultancy services, there would be one of two payment mechanisms. There'd be what's called a lump sum, or sometimes stated as a fixed price, where the risk with that payment mechanism sits with the provider, i.e. the consultant. And then secondly, there would be a time charge where the risk sits with the client. A lump sum option effectively means that we're going to quote a single fee or a total cost. Let's say it's, £20,000 or £50,000 for a piece of work, and the risk sits with us. So if we overrun and it takes longer because of unforeseen circumstances, the client will only pay the lump sum. And in theory, we could lose money on that payment mechanism. But on the flip side to that, typically a consultant would build in risk to that lump sum proposal, so there's a buffer for those contingency items that may crop up and occur along the way. That said, there may be things that are stated within the contract under the clauses for change that are valid compensation events that the consultant can claim and increase the value of the lump sum. Secondly, we have a time charge payment mechanism where the consultant would build up a proposal based on the rates and the hours initially, but they would be paid for what they've done. So if we overrun, so we take longer to perform said task, we get paid for the hours worked, and therefore the risk is solely with the client. Okay, so we've covered contracts and the parties to the contract. Let's move over to step 2, which is the commissioning of the work. So the work is commissioned typically by the client, and they will have what's called a budget for performing the work. That's the amount that they allocated, allowing for risk and contingency items. The client writes a scope, and they provide that scope to the provider to produce their proposal based on the payment mechanisms that we've just covered over here. And typically a proposal will include these 6 items. There'll be risks that the client may think will materialise along the way. They'll give an idea of the deadline or the timescale for completing the piece of work or providing the services if it's time bound. Some contracts and scopes of services will have open-ended agreements, so they'll just be ongoing on a retainer, which you'll find in the legal profession quite a lot, where lawyers are employed to provide services over a period of time under a contract. But more often than not, there will be a deadline for a piece of work. Thirdly, and very importantly, the scope will define the deliverables to be produced. If it's physical documentation, reports, complicated analyses, they'll be stated in deliverables. There'll be client inputs, that's the information that the client will provide to the consultant to complete the said piece of work. Any constraints that the consultant will need to take into account and work in accordance with. And finally, any professional standards, regulations, best practice documentation that the consultant needs to follow when completing their work. So hopefully that's clear. That's how work is commissioned. Thirdly and finally, let's talk generally about project management. So all of this work that's being produced here by the consultant under the scope of the services needs to be managed. And typically that will be in terms of time and cost. So time is done by producing a project program, which will include tasks and milestones, which are effectively end dates for set deliverables, with the program being broken down into phases with milestones at the end of each project phase. Those activities will be progressed, so at any point in time that the project manager updates and checks in with the team who's delivering the work, they will complete a percentage completion against each particular task in the Gantt chart or program. And the typical softwares that are used for project programming are Microsoft Power Project, Microsoft Project, etc. There's numerous software tools that can be used for project programs. Earned value analysis is a technique that project managers use to evaluate whether a program is healthy and on track or not. What they do to perform this is they look at the percentage spent, i.e. if it's on a time charge mechanism, which we discussed over here, they'll look at the rates multiplied by the hours to get the cost spent to date, and they will compare that to the percentage complete. So for example, if the budget and the fee proposal that we've produced for our client is around £10,000, let's say we've spent £3,000 to date, but the project program shows that we've only completed 15% of the program, then we're 15% adrift of where we want to be. And unfortunately, what that will mean is by the time we complete all the deliverables to the end milestone, we will have overspent. That's when a risk may materialise due to an unforeseen circumstance, and we might have the entitlement to claim if it's an unforeseen risk and that's stated within the contract. If it's not, and the risk sits with us because we're on a lump sum, then unfortunately we're going to overspend and we're going to lose money. So that's not good, hence why earned value analysis is so important. Finally, we have the billing to the client, which the project managers take care of. That's typically done monthly, and the way that the billing is approached is an application for payment gets raised and submitted based on lump sum payment mechanism. It would be a claim for a percentage of the total fee based on the number of activities completed at the end of month. Typically, it has to be whole activities that are completed within the programme that are claimed, or if it's on a time charge or cost reimbursable mechanism, we will simply bill for all of the hours multiplied by the rates of those individuals for the work that's been done within that particular month. I hope that's helpful, and I hope that framework gives you the commercial awareness that you're looking for. If there's any other particular topics that you'd like in the future, feel free to recommend them in the comments or give me a lead. And yeah, hope this has been valuable. Please feel free to share it with others if you thought it was and was helpful. I'll speak to you in the next videos.